Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast, coming to you today from sunny UK. Amazing amount of sunshine. It's such a shock. Really huge amounts of solar generation from my solar panels. I'm going to bore you now and tell you how much, because it's really impressive. We're not at the end of the day yet, but we're nowhere near the end of the day. 67 kilowatt hours of electricity. So most of that has gone into an electric car, which means that there's been no fuel imported and nothing burnt to allow me to drive about 210 miles. How can that possibly work? And how could that be extended to reduce our fuel dependence for millions and millions of people, and a massive reduction in cost? Just a fantasy, just a wishy-washy fantasy. Well, today I'm talking to someone who doesn't do wishy-washy fantasies, but who does real, hardcore, long-term, feet on the ground, in grinding through advocacy in the United States. The Sierra Club, which we will learn about in this podcast, is an amazing organization in the United States, been going there for a long time. And I heard of it and I kind of knew what it did, but I wanted to find out more. And today's guest is an amazing woman who has worked there for many years and is an incredibly, basically, when I read the article she'd written, and when she saw the podcast and shows that we do, we both realized we're on the same page, but with a really American perspective. So it's really fascinating to talk to her. So I'm not going to go on any more about that, because I'm going to let the podcast and let Katherine explain it. So that's all. And obviously, if you want to subscribe to the Fully Charged Show or the Everything Electric channel, please do. And please do tell your friends about these podcasts, because they are growing. It's amazing. They're still growing. It's a bit like electric car sales. They're actually going up, even though everyone is telling you they're going down. That's all. I'm going to now introduce, from the Sierra Club in the United States, from the capital of Washington, D.C., please welcome onto the Fully Charged podcast, Katherine Garcia. Love everything electric? Join us live in Canada this September, the South in October, and Australia and London in 2025. So, Katherine, thank you. This is very exciting for me, because there's some things that you do and areas you're involved in that I've known about for years, but I don't know very much about them now I think about it. So I spent a lot of time in the United States in the early noughties, became very aware of, firstly, the California Air Resource Board, because I was in Los Angeles. Secondly, the EPA, neither of which I'd ever heard of before. And then thirdly, the Sierra Club. If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind for people who are outside because those organizations are very familiar with a lot of people in the USA, but probably less so for people outside. So could you give us a brief, let's start with the Sierra Club, because that's fascinating. So that's where you work now. That's the organization you work with. Can you tell me just a bit about where that came from, when, and what its aims are?
Of course, yeah. And Robert, thanks for having me on the show. I started working for the Sierra Club in 2017. And at that time, I was living in California. But the Sierra Club is a national environmental organization, and it's one of the oldest grassroots organizations. And what that means is that we have chapters that are based all around the country. And there's about 64 chapters across the country. There's all over. And within those chapters, there's actually groups. And so it's very, very locally run. So the folks there are advocating for clean air, clean water, clean energy, clean transportation. But it actually started as like a hiking club. It started back in the 1890s. And
Okay.
It was, at the time, folks that really wanted to get together to enjoy the outdoors and go out hiking. And it has evolved to, now that we live in cities, we want to get out back to nature, back to enjoying the outdoors. So it's really about not only protecting nature and getting folks out and enjoying nature, but also protecting our air and water, which is so important to the entire planet. So when we needed to start addressing global warming, Sierra Club was there to make sure that we were protecting the environment and to make sure that we ourselves and our children and our children's children have a healthy planet.
Yeah.
So I'm inspired to work here at Sierra Club every day. And I feel like just like a little nexus of our conservation, um, our conservation advocacy and our clean energy advocacy. One of our exciting projects that we're working on is making sure that you don't just have to have a car to get out to nature. We're actually setting up transit lines and really convenient bike trails to get out to nature, so you're not really relying on a car, and it just opens up that accessibility to everybody.
Because that is, I mean, I think that's a topic I'd love to get onto in a moment about, you know, the in a sense, car culture as we know it started and became a thing in the United States. It's
Absolutely.
You know, more than any other country on earth. That's where it
that's
off.
Something that I'm working to solve for every day, and it really opens up, you know, accessibility issues for clean mobility. But going back to your original question, the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. Yes. They're charged with making sure everybody has clean air, clean water, healthy planet. They're actually in charge of regulating vehicles. And essentially what we would call mobile sources. And so vehicles, trucks, trains, making sure that they're as clean as possible. And the Clean Air Act actually gives them authority. And essentially that's a law in the United States to make sure that the Environmental Protection Act can make sure we have a healthy country for Americans. And going over to the California Air Resources Board, that's actually a regulatory agency that sets up its own policies, very much in conjunction with the EPA, under the authority of the the Clean Air Act. But they have been given authority to actually set up some policies that are stricter than the Environmental Protection Agency, and other states have actually been able to follow that. So, follow those policies, and it's actually really moved the needle. That's one of the reasons why we have been pushing manufacturers to produce cleaner cars. So that work is super inspiring, gets me out of bed every morning, and I feel like it's just a game changer for making sure we have cleaner vehicles.
Yes. And I mean, I think this is the point I've often made in this country to kind of explain where this comes from, because in a sense, a lot of people here will have just suddenly gone, oh, there's electric cars. What are they? You know, they've just sort of appeared out of the mist. There's no background to it. And I mean, I was very aware, I was very lucky, really. And that's in a sense why I'm doing what I'm doing now, to be working in California from about 2001 to about 2006, which is really when that the consciousness, in a sense, around finding an alternative to combustion, particularly in cities, absolutely came out of clean air. It didn't come out of, worrying about climate change or CO2. It was about, wait a minute, our kids that go to school near a big freeway in Los Angeles do worse academically than the kids that live out in the hills where the air is clean. I mean, it's like there were really solid statistics, weren't there?
Absolutely.
And old people suffered of breathing problems with the pollution.
Yeah, we study these hotspots where there's asthma, and there's actually this fascinating study in Oakland where folks who were living near the ports and warehouses, they actually had a significant lower life expectancy, and it was because of that pollution. And so this is something we often cite, especially as it relates to our fights to electrify trucks and freight, the freight sector. We really, we cite these health issues where, it's really unjust, because everyone, no matter where you live, no matter what your zip code is, you should be breathing clean air. And that's something that we really, we align with our environmental justice partners, folks that live in frontline communities, people who are working, living day to day right near warehouses and these corridors. And as you know, California, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, car culture, and it's also this truck culture that has prevailed and with this freight industry. So what has happened is so much of freight comes in through the ports of in Southern California, Long Beach and Long Beach and LA. And then the cargo is taken off the ships and then transported via truck over to what's called the Inland Empire. And there's neighborhoods all through this because there's freeways cross-cutting everywhere in Southern California. So this is a major priority for our organization, our partners, and environmental justice allies.
Because I mean, this is it's a huge issue to tackle, but I mean, it is technologically possible to move all those goods via electric trains that are powered by renewable energy. I mean, it's not like going, oh, we're going to, it isn't fairy dust. It's complicated, solid physics, reality technology that does work. And that's when you see, if you imagine a train goes past you, particularly in the United States, when I've been on highways out in the desert, and you see a train that's like, I don't know, it looks like it's 4 miles long. It's huge, but it's got 1 or 2 engines. It's not got 400 engines, which is what trucks are. Trucks are a train with 400 engines, all belching out diesel.
And this is what we're advocating for. So we are advocating for more cargo by train and increasing the reliance on rail. I actually have a team of staff and volunteers that have been engaging on rail advocacy, and not just leaning more on that, also on passenger rail, taking cars off the road and making sure people can get to where they need to go by rail. President Biden has really made it a priority to invest in rail. And in fact, this term with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, they had the largest infusion of funding for Amtrak that has ever taken place ever since the establishment of Amtrak. And that's something that we supported throughout the process. I will say, not only making sure that rail is accessible, but also making sure it's cleaner. And in fact, we had Sierra Club and allies were working on the California Air Resources Board regulation recently on clean locomotives, which is a game changer. And we're hoping to advocate that at the EPA to see what we can do nationally as well. We've actually really taken notes from other parts of the world that have already moved to electric trains. So the technology is there. It's just we're just behind in the US.
I mean, that's a thing I have to kind of remind myself occasionally, because I'm constantly the recipient of a deluge of, I'm going to be gender specific here, men who will argue the most minuscule detailed reason why they're going to keep burning petrol. They would never describe it as burning gasoline, because of the very specific needs that they have in electric cars. And the vile term they use, aren't there yet, which really annoys me. But what I want to, and now I say, that's fine. If what we do now is okay, for this country in particular, we're importing 1.04 billion pounds worth. So that's about $1.5 billion a week. We're spending that money, goes out of our economy to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, from probably the United States, from Norway, used to be from Russia. I think we've turned that one off a bit. But, that money leaves our economy, and then we burn that fuel once. You can only use it once. And if that's okay, then that's fine. You carry on burning your fuel. But I can't help, I always want to refer to, because this, you may be aware of this, you may not. It was pre-COVID, so I'm not sure what year it was. It was a very tragic story of a 9-year-old girl, Ella Kissy Deborah, who lived right next to a really busy road in South London. She had asthma. Every time she had an asthma crisis was a critically bad local air pollution day. And she passed away at the age of 9. And her mother has become this remarkable advocate for clean air.
Yes. So actually, a couple of years ago, I heard her mother speak at a conference I attended in Virginia. And it was extremely, extremely heartbreaking.
It really is.
She has been vocal about
Yeah.
her daughter's death, how this was preventable, and then she just needs the world to know. And it is just absolutely heartbreaking. As a mother myself, like, I just cannot imagine, because I've been in situations where my son has had RSV and I'm sitting in the hospital bed with him, and I want to do everything possible to make sure he can breathe. And, there's been times when I've called the nurse, from home, and they've had me, measure his heart rate and measure his breathing before I even go into the emergency room, just to see what might be going on. And I feel helpless, So I as a mother myself, hearing her story is just absolutely tragic, and I don't want anyone else to go through that.
No, but I mean, it was what has turned things around, and I think it has had an impact here. Is that she was the first person who, on her death certificate, it said she died as a result. I think the words are a direct result of local air pollution, and it's burning fossil fuel. And I mean, this is, I think, where we would also agree is the thing that I've become extremely aware of, and very recently, I've just reviewed a new electric car, which was great. But the company that make it, I don't even want to mention who it is, very well-known, big automotive company.
Yes.
Are pushing hybrids, and I just said stop calling them hybrids. They're petrol cars with some other bits tied on now.
Yes. So in fact, one of our campaigns is calling out the inventor of hybrids. So Toyota, and Toyota is very, very, very well loved in the United States. They're seen as a green, sustainable leader. And you know what? When they invented the Prius,
it was incredible.
That was incredible. But we have moved on. The world has moved on and is expecting way more from Toyota. And it's insulting when they have these huge banners, huge billboards. They advertise it everywhere at sports games, at stadiums, on commercials. You cannot watch 10 minutes of television without seeing a Toyota ad. And they literally have coined this term called electrified, and we call it electrolyte, because the fact
electrolyte. I'm just writing that down.
Absolutely. We're calling them out because here's the thing. These vehicles, the hybrids, the straight up hybrids that are not plug-in, they only run on gas. They only run on petrol. That's what they do. Do not say it's electrified. That is nonsense. And so it gets my blood pressure up. But I see it everywhere. And they spend so much money on marketing. I'm just like, in a dream world, every dollar Toyota spends, other companies that are making EVs, I wish they had that money. I wish they had that marketing plan. I wish they had every billboard. I wish they had these EVs at stadiums on display. It's just, I wish we lived in a different world where people were seeing EVs as much as they see hybrids. Yeah.
No, the background, some of the things that I think we should both take some hope from is that the total number of electric vehicles in the world is now huge. It's around 400 million. But what I really love is the statistic that 280 million of those, which is a lot, are mopeds and scooters in Asia. And that's had a massive impact. So we've had anecdotal evidence so far. We haven't really got any statistics about it, but from people who've got in touch with us who live in Malaysia and the Philippines, who've said the gas station that they always went to fill up their scooter has closed because no one goes there.
Wow.
No one uses it because they all use electric scooters, and they've got amazing infrastructure now with battery swapping. So it's I don't want to wait while I charge. No, you don't. You go up to a scooter thing, take your battery out, put it in the thing, take another one, off you go. It takes about 7 seconds. It's much quicker than buying gas. Those, and that we're not really aware of that here. I'm certainly aware of it in London. There's a lot of electric two-wheel devices flying about, but they're most scooters, but not to that level. And I've seen footage in places like Shanghai or Delhi, India. It's a huge thing as well, and Bangkok. The streets are quiet because there's just thousands of scooters
That's
and
remarkable.
mopeds.
Yeah. So we're not seeing that as much in the US. One thing that we are seeing is a lot of folks buying e-bikes.
Yes. Yeah.
When we advocate, because we do a lot of advocacy around local legislation and state legislation, we actually have incentives. So if somebody wants to buy an e-bike and they qualify for an incentive, they're able to get that, and it's quite a
Right.
bit. It's quite a bit of a discount, and it's actually in DC in particular. It's actually promoting local, brick and mortar bike shops, which is helping the
Yeah.
economy here. But what we're hearing is that in other areas of the country, like in Vermont and Colorado, these incentives are just in high demand. And
Right. Yeah.
thing to note, though, when we do advocate for an incentive, and we are talking about the benefits of e-bikes, we're also talking about the safety requirements. So
Yeah.
make sure there's protected bike lanes, make sure there's infrastructure, safe areas to bike and
Yeah.
walk as well. So and actually slowing down cars is a big part
Yeah.
of it. So, we're not just saying, go out and bike wherever, we
Yeah.
need to make sure that there's safety precautions, but if
Yeah.
we can get folks driving less, I mean, that is the goal. We need
Yes.
to be driving less and making sure that there's accessible ways of getting around. Also transit, we're talking about investing in transit, having cleaner buses, having more reliable buses and more reliable routes that transit
Yeah.
agencies need to be investing in.
No, I mean, it is a peculiar quirk of the show we make, which definitely started out to sort of say, we think electric cars might work. I started it how long now? 14 years ago. So it's been going a long time, when there really were only one or two electric cars and there was no charging infrastructure anywhere, and it was all a bit of a hodgepodge. But always I've wanted to say, look, if you want to go from A to B, can you walk? If you can't, can you cycle? If you can't, can you use public transport? If you can't, can you go and buy taxi? Can you car share? And if you can't do any of those, then go in a car. But, that is a very difficult sell when you're talking to big automotive manufacturers. But interestingly, this is, I think, intriguing, and I'm not sure if this is happening with United States manufacturing, car makers. But there is a lot of discussion within the likes of Renault, Citroën, Peugeot, BMW, Volkswagen in Europe about building cars that can be shared more easily.
Absolutely.
So thinking about that from the get-go, from the way they're built and what their software and how they operate and how you access them, which is quite interesting, because that's, the absurdity. I know you'll be aware of this, but I love looking at an audience when I say, you only use your car that you spent tens of thousands of pounds on, that you think says something about it. You only use it for 5% of the time you own it.
Yeah.
That's like an oligarch with a big house in New York who flies in for a week a year. It's insane.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
For the most part, they're just sitting there,
Yeah.
And that's also one of the things that I've encountered in my, my years of advocacy is people tell me I cannot get an EV because I do road trips. And it's like, I do road trips too, and I don't own a car,
Right.
So, every so often I'll rent a car, or I'll take the train. And, I just get to where I need to go. I do find myself that I'm very fortunate living in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Today I took the metro to work. I know that there are places where, especially more rural areas, where you do need a car. And in that case, I really want to make sure that you know about the incentives for electric vehicles, used vehicles. So for the first time ever, there is now a used electric vehicle incentive that's national.
Right. Oh, that's brilliant. Very good.
And because, the majority of people who do drive and own a car, they didn't buy it new. Very few people buy new cars. And some people buy, secondhand, thirdhand cars, even fourth-hand cars, and so we really need to make sure the incentives are there. And going back to, what I was saying earlier about hybrids, for some people, I do know that a plug-in hybrid is the best route, and
Right.
and maybe their next car will be a plug-in hybrid, and so
Yeah.
I am, depending on what your needs are, I totally
Yeah.
support, you know, getting a vehicle that's going to suit your needs, but at
Yeah.
least do a test drive. So one
Yes.
thing that's
Yeah.
exciting is Sierra Club and several partners. Every year we work on a couple of initiatives that host events all across the
Yeah.
country. So last month in April, it was Earth Month. So we hosted Drive Electric Earth Month. There was hundreds of events in
Right.
every state had an event, and it wasn't just on Earth Day. It was all of the whole month of April.
Right.
And at each of these events, we had EVs, we had drivers, even manufacturers were there. Ford
Right.
actually. They had vehicles, they had representatives hosting these ride and drives, and people could get in and ask questions and ask about charging. And so these events are very, very
Really
special
important. Yeah.
and important, and just a game changer for learning about it, because it is new technology, and there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of
Yeah.
myths. And so we want to make sure people have good, accurate information that they're able to get behind the wheel and test these out, because at the end of the day, these vehicles are more efficient, they're more zippy, they're fun to drive, especially compared to gas vehicles. And honestly, gas guzzlers are fueling the climate crisis, and so we want to make sure that we are getting folks into cars that are going to be healthier for the planet.
Yeah, and is that because I've heard of this scheme? Is that a kind of Sierra Club initiative?
So we're a co-host. Yeah, right. So we're a co-host, and we work with partners all around the country. Right. These are community events. So they're hosted at universities. Some of them are hosted at dealerships or parks, and it's a great way to just be in community. And sometimes we get media out there and policymakers, mayors to come test out these vehicles, and then not only light duty. We also have some electric school buses and transit buses. We've gotten some vans out there. I even saw an electric forklift at an event in New York, and then e-bikes also. I actually have a cargo bike. It's like a Dutch bike. So I took mine out to an event in DC last year. And then electric motorcycles as well, because several people like to show off their electric motorcycles, which are great too.
But it's it's effectively, I don't know if you know, we run live events, and they have become, I was the one who was skeptical. So the team that do that, they were going, no, it'll be wonderful. I went, no one's going to come. It's going to be awful. I was very wrong. So we have huge crowds coming, but we do, the last event we did we did one in London, which was frighteningly big, but we did one in Sydney, Australia. We did, I think, 6,000 test drives in a couple of days.
That's amazing.
So there was, and because they've had a peculiar experience in Australia. They had a government that was extremely hostile to solar, wind, electric vehicles, anything to do with that, even though they have the highest penetration of solar panels on their roofs than anywhere in the world, which kind of makes sense when you're there. Yeah. It's quite sunny. Yeah. But so since that, it's kind of held back. And since that government has left, the explosion in electric vehicles in Australia is uncanny. It's really,
and if
really
you have solar panels, it just makes sense for you to have an EV. Just power with your solar panels.
Yes. My car, the car that's behind me, behind that wall, has, I think it's about 216 miles of range, and not one of those electrons came through the grid or was generated by gas or nuclear or coal or anything. It was from my roof.
Amazing.
Yes. And that is, I know I'm very, very lucky, and the people who can do that are very lucky, and you have it's a massively unfair advantage. But you could have a community car park.
Yes.
In a neighborhood with massive amounts of solar on it and chargers underneath, and it has been done. It could be done. There's those examples always exist.
And here in Washington D.C., folks that do have an EV, many of them don't have a garage. Many of them don't even have a dedicated parking spot, and so one solution that people have found is they have shopping centers, they have Walmarts that have charging. There's a particular vehicle that has free charging for 2 years when you buy it. And so with that, it just, you go and you do your shopping and then you go back and
you fill your car.
Especially if you're not, here, as I said, in DC, you're lucky that you don't have to drive every day. And it's one of those things where you just, you find a solution.
But then the pushback, then I'm intrigued by that, because from manufacturers, we're very aware of Toyota. And in fact, I used to have quite a close relationship with them because I did a TV show that featured a Prius 15 years ago. And they were really supportive and very good. And so I knew a lot of people who worked at Toyota. They now will not talk to us. We're dead to them because we've been quite critical of their stance.
I believe it. Yeah. No, they only want the seal of approval of sustainability, and they do not deserve it.
No. But then, because I'm sort of aware of what's happening in the European market more probably than the US market, but because there's definitely a pushback and a very within the media in this country. There's this, it's so bizarre because it doesn't make any sense. But because the sales of electric vehicles have flatlined, I'll rephrase that, because the reality is the sales of cars, full stop, have flatlined because our economy is literally broken. We've been in recession until yesterday. So there's been really difficult economic times here. But the story, big, loud headlines is, no one wants electric cars. Electric car sales are still ridiculously high.
But it's true.
The story is no one wants them and no one's buying them and they're all awful. And I don't know if that similar thing is happening in the USA.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is every headline, I think this goes back to the clickbait phenomenon, but every single headline is about how terrible EVs are or EV sales are. And then you actually read the article and it says,
yes, it's completely different.
But this is the highest number of EVs that have ever been sold. Or, all of these chargers are going in and people love EVs. And, here are these new models of EVs. And so if you actually read the story, or even like 2 paragraphs down to the end, and that's where you get the positive, angle. We try to do a lot of work with narrative and lifting up stories of people who like, driving EVs and who it's working for,
Yeah. But I think one of the ones I'm sure also you're aware of this, which I've found, I guess, is emerged more recently, and I'm completely in sympathy with it up to a point, is the sort of equal and opposite narrative from, there's no term for it, but let's say radical cyclists. So people who go, they would love to ban all cars overnight, like a Stalinist decree. No one can have a car. And there's no question, if we could get rid of cars, imagine how wonderful our cities would be, and how good the public transport would be, and how efficient it would be, and how clean the air would be. I totally get it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of not going to happen, and I wish it would, but I don't think it is. And but quite often now I'll get quite a sort of critical response from people because I'm pushing electric cars and they're just as bad. And I go, well, I'm not pushing them, one, and two, they're not just as bad.
Yeah. Well, so two things. Right now we are in a climate emergency. And, every single day we're hearing about extreme weather events. We're hearing about everything from tornadoes to floods to hurricanes to wildfires. And I know that this is happening all over the world. Because my organization is based in the US, I'm mostly, talking about the statistics in the US. But, when you have unseasonably rare wildfires and more and more stronger hurricanes that are just absolutely, we used to be, our meteorologists would talk about how they know how exactly precise their predictions will be for hurricanes. That's out the window now. We really do not have a grasp on hurricanes like we
Yeah.
used to. And in fact, there was a recent one that I heard about last year that it was just, they didn't realize how much rain was going to come that quickly.
Right. Yeah.
And this is a particular issue in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Miami. They're really experiencing this all the time. And so we have a limited amount of time to address these climate emissions. And so our philosophy at the Sierra Club is really needing to pull all levers. So moving for more infill development, we have a strong housing policy to make it so that you're putting in affordable housing, you're putting in transit in your housing, new developments. That's where you can really have mixed use and a game changer. You can have people living very close to transit, and then you don't have to drive as much. We're talking in cities across the country about parking reform, because the parking minimums that we have in the United States, they're inflated. They don't have to be that way. And when you have less parking, you have more of a reliance on transit and other ways. And, now with Uber and Lyft, you really don't have to have these inflated parking minimums. So we talk about these levers. So it's...
So just to interrupt, to interrupt, but the parking minimums, is this like then you have to supply this number of parking spaces if you're going to build this building? Is it like...
Yes.
It's that way around, right? Because I'm not aware of that. Right? And that's like a building regulation.
This is a building regulation.
Right.
So towns across the country have these parking minimums. And so what we're doing is trying to either reduce the parking minimum or not have this like inflated target for how much parking is there. Essentially, when you put in like everything from any new construction, if you put in a new mall or you put in a new stadium, you say, this is how many parking spots you have. And what they do is they actually set it based on the busiest day. So like Black Friday, you'll set it based on Black Friday, but then the rest of the year, it'll be empty.
It's just a huge empty parking lot.
And then back to our first moment of this conversation, you talk about car culture. That's where it comes from.
Yes.
Yeah. And so even, our advocacy around bike lanes, they'll say like, but we need those spots for parking. We can't, or we need those spots for the lanes because everybody drives. And it's like, well, if we had a bike lane, people might bike.
Not everybody would drive.
Yeah. So it's all about every lever, so more rail, more transit, better land use policy, more transit-oriented development, and then especially more affordable and smaller electric vehicles. I mean, this is what we're telling every manufacturer: make them more affordable, make them smaller, make them safer, and make them more accessible.
They must be so annoyed at both of us because that's all we say. What about, are you going to make one this one is the size of my parental home when I was a child? Are you going to make anything smaller? Just massive. Well, I sat in the F-150 Lightning, which I'm really glad Ford are making them, but I sat in that car and went, this seriously is about the size of my first apartment. It is just a monstrous piece of machinery.
Well, so in that case, we do talk about use cases, right? So the F-150 is a dependable car or a dependable truck if you're towing, if you're using it for work, for utilities. It really makes sense. A lot of these utilities do have trucks.
It's so much better than a diesel or a gas one.
Absolutely, and especially for these work trucks where they have like a dedicated depot, it really makes sense. Where I don't understand it is these personal vehicles where they're actually not towing anything. No.
I mean, I've got to say, the amount of women roughly your age with small children that I've seen in America in vehicles that it's unimaginably enormous, and they're all driving down to get a litre of milk and some apples. You're going, really? This is...
Yes.
It is. I mean, I have to sort of turn off and you go, you can't judge it. I mean, I had a wonderful example in Australia because my wife is Australian, so we spend a lot of time there, and we were out sitting with friends of hers, having coffee outside in the shade, beautiful, hot, very hot day, massive truck that you cannot buy in Europe. It's a Toyota. It is so big, I couldn't believe it's a V8. And this truck drove up, and it was ticking over. She didn't turn it off. It was going vol, 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 vol.
No.
And the exhaust pipe, the tailpipe was like this round.
Yeah.
And I expected a kind of big, tough, roughy redneck man to get out and all angry and wanted to make Australia great again. It was a very small woman who in yoga kit. And she came to get a coffee, and then she went back and got in this huge thing and drove off. And I I don't understand the human culture, if that's normal.
Yeah, no.
It's difficult, isn't it?
It's hard.
But,
it's hard to, that's the part that's hard to change. Yeah.
Yes.
It's the culture.
But I mean, also, I think it is counterproductive to be what I've just done, is be judgmental and critical of it, because it doesn't. Then it just entrenches people and goes, screw you, I'm going to get an even bigger truck.
Yeah. No,
So
and that's when, looking at, having these community events, as I mentioned before.
Yes.
So the next round of events is going to be in September. It's called National Drive Electric Earth Week. Excuse me. No, it was, I'm mixing up the two. So National Drive Electric Week, and there's events all across the country, and they're really exciting.
Right.
So yeah. And then, kudos to you for hosting your events as well. I mean, these are events where, friends bring friends, neighbors bring neighbors, and you just get the conversation rolling organically.
And I mean, do you feel in the sort of big picture term that there are, even if people haven't done anything in their own personal life, there is a kind of general consciousness that within the next generation, we probably will have to do something. I mean, is that because I feel there is a sort of turning? I'm getting different kickback to electric vehicles and renewable energy.
Yeah.
It's not the same one that from 10 years ago.
So going back to our advocacy here in the U.S., the EPA just finalized light duty standards.
Yes.
They really move the needle for manufacturers to be producing electric vehicles. And they do it in a measured way. It's a very, very, realistic timetable. All of these manufacturers are getting incentives to open up plants in the U.S. They're getting, research and development dollars. They're getting, incentives to buy consumers are getting incentives to buy the vehicles. And so we're creating the ecosystem so that we can be not only in a regulatory way, pushing manufacturers to produce these cars, but also installing the charging infrastructure needed and also doing the education around that. And then, as I mentioned before, with the California Air Resources Board, they have designed a regulation that actually pushes manufacturers to go further, faster. And with that, certain states have adopted a regulation that makes it so that by 2035, you will have to buy, if you're buying a new car, so you could always buy a used car, but if you're buying a new car, in the state, it really needs to be electric. It needs to be a plug-in vehicle and a zero-emission vehicle because it's technology agnostic, as we say. So. We just really cannot be moving forward into the future with this reliance on oil, in perpetuity, and things need to shift around. So at this moment, we have 14 states that have adopted this ambitious regulation.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I think that, our advocacy out in California a few years ago, that helped make sure that we have a strong federal rule as well, because we know, 14 states, it is a good chunk of the market because some of these states have, there a lot of light duty vehicle sales every year. But that's going to move the needle. It's going to make sure that manufacturers are supporting this supply chain, the supply of EVs.
One of the other criticisms in this country, which was well founded, say 5 or 6 years ago, is now like irrelevant, but it's still around, is the charging infrastructure isn't there. And I know there's been we had worked a lot, and I've met many times Chelsea Sexton, who I know now works for the Biden White House on charging infrastructure. So we kind of know she's not allowed to tell us very much while she's Well, she's a proper civil servant, but is it, because I haven't seen it since I haven't been in the United States for about 4 years. So I was aware, I did see, like I'd see in a mall car park, as you were saying, I'd see a long row of chargers. I go, okay, so there is a lot of charging around. I mean, is that still expanding and still being installed? And is it receiving kind of public recognition that it exists?
Just getting started. Yeah, we're actually
Right.
just getting started. I mean, so utilities and states have been for many years installing charging infrastructure. For a long time, there was VW money that was, installing the charging infrastructure. But with the Biden administration, he set a goal for installing charging, and that was that initial goal. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was a way to implement that goal. And so, now every state is applying for what's called NEVI money. So there's NEVI money and CFI funding that is installing these chargers. They're creating a corridor for fast charging. And it is just getting started, but we know that, there's a lot of the fast charging is for people who are either taking road trips or can't charge at home, or something like, if you need a fast charge, like if you're an Uber or Lyft driver. So those are just starting to roll out. One fun fact that I heard one of my colleagues say just recently was he expects by the end of 2024, half of all states will either have implemented it's actually installed and finished and have it operational, these charging infrastructure, these charging stations, or at least have it in development, like have shovels in the ground. So it is moving. We would like it to move faster, but it is moving. But we're not starting at zero. There's Tesla has its supercharger network, and they've opened that up to other manufacturers. We're not starting at zero. We need to be moving faster to make sure we're meeting demand.
Yes, I don't want to go down the Tesla rabbit hole, although it is fascinating. I mean, the fact that the supercharging network is just exemplary. I mean, across Europe, across Australia, across the United States, just like, if you want to use if you want to go to a charger that works, guaranteed. You go to but he's just fired the entire team that put that together, and you just go, I don't want to. I mean, we don't have to talk about it because it's just a whole other topic. But
I will say,
a bit baffling.
This is not the first time he's been unpredictable. And you just roll with it. You just roll with it, And so we are going to continue seeing the supercharger network. I'm confident about that.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Because at the moment, then, are all superchargers in the United States open to any vehicle, or is it just specific sites? Or
so it's moving forward. Forward. Yeah, there's a staging approach. Many folks that don't own a Tesla have already, been notified that they're going to be receiving adapters so that they can charge in their state. It's a staging process. And I heard that, it's still moving forward. But one point about the supercharger network is that this concept of range anxiety, it really is a rare excuse for the Tesla driver, and so whenever you're talking about range anxiety, for the most part, it's somebody who does not own a Tesla. And I think it was a great move to enter into these service agreements with the other manufacturers, because what that says is that these other manufacturers are saying, we want to sell these EVs. We want to make sure that our drivers have access to this reliable and nearly ubiquitous network. So I think it was a really smart move, and I know they're going to work it out.
No, it is. So we don't need to go there. And the Cybertruck, I'm also very happy to just gently skirt around, but keeping a good distance because I don't want to bash myself on the sharp corners.
Nope.
But anyway, there's plenty of other things. But I've recently done an episode about in fact, with a company that runs the software that runs the charging network for school buses, because I think this is a fascinating kind of niche case, very specifically American. My children used to catch the bus to school from outside my house here, diesel bus, of course. but it was just run by a local company. It wasn't, that's the case around the country. But the kind of long yellow buses, when you understand the use case of those buses and the electrification of those buses, doesn't even matter about the environment or clean air. It makes more sense economically.
Absolutely. Yeah. They have a reliable route. They go in the morning, they go in the afternoon. In the summer, they're essentially like gigantic, wonderful batteries for clean energy. It's just a game changer. And we're so excited to work on the implementation of the Clean School Bus Program. This was a program that was established through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I'm actually a part of a coalition called the Alliance for Electric School Buses. And we have advocates on the ground all over the country, reaching out to school districts, talking about the benefits of electric school buses, talking about the opportunities there, and making sure that more and more students across the country who are going to school are not in diesel buses and not breathing that diesel toxic pollution every day. In those cases, you mentioned this from your kids, the students are arriving at school after going through a commute that's really bad air pollution, really loud, really, it's a game changer now. They have a smooth ride, a clean ride to school. And so we're doing as much as possible to get the word out and get as many buses out on the road every year, because there's billions of dollars now to get those cleaner buses on our roads.
Right. Because the other thing I just wanted to briefly mention is, which president set up the EPA?
It was Nixon.
It was Nixon, because this is the thing, you sort of think, I think it's really, it's becoming increasingly important to kind of, in a sense, remove what we're talking about, the advocacy we're talking about, from party politics. Yeah. Because Richard Nixon was not exactly a tree-hugging, left-wing socialist do-gooder. He was, he's got a fairly salty reputation, but he set up the EPA. Because I was fascinated, I do remember reading it a long time ago as to how that happened, but was there a specific event that spurred him to do that? It is such an extraordinary bit of history.
Yeah, we wanted to protect our environment, and it wasn't at the time this political statement that it was just a matter of breathing clean air and making sure, essentially it's protecting Americans. We should all see protecting Americans as not a political dynamic. It's just, this is our country and we're proud to live in America and we want to breathe clean air. There was a number of pollution related events in the 60s and 70s. And, we really need to deter pollution. And reduce toxics, which we're getting into our water. And, at the time, LA was, you couldn't, what they say is you couldn't see the mountains because of all the smog. So we really needed to put in policies that were going to be beneficial for everyone who lived in the US.
Yeah. Now, that was a very brief bit of personal history. When I was 13, I don't want to tell you what year that was, a long time ago, I had a German friend, went to Germany with his family. We stayed in a town called Bochum, which is on the Ruhr Valley. And we walked across, my friend and I, we went for a walk to a park and we crossed the river on a bridge. And while we were on the bridge, our eyes were running and we couldn't breathe, we were choking. And that was the Ruhr. It was yellow. Yeah. That river was yellow. This was in 1969. Mm-hmm. It was the most disgraceful levels of pollution. And I drove into Bochum 5 years ago with my wife in an electric car, and we went over the bridge and I looked down the river, it was clear.
Oh my gosh.
And it was amazing. And why, we were so bad. Our parents, I'd like to say, were so profligate and wasteful and just chucked everything. Oh, it doesn't matter, just dip it in there. What is it? It's sulfuric acid, or pour it in the river. Without a second thought, all those and the Ruhr Valley is very, very heavy industry. It's where Germany's industry is sort of based along there, and they've cleaned it up. So it is possible to, and they've cleaned it up, and the German economy hasn't crashed into ruin, and they now live in caves. They're doing all right.
Yeah.
Against.
Yeah, that's what we say with the U.S., moving into electric vehicles and clean energy, this can mean clean energy jobs. And it's much better to be in the clean energy economy than in some of these other exploitive, like the oil industry that is harming all of our communities. And it's just, there's so many more opportunities now in clean energy, and that makes me really proud for the work we do.
Yeah, because I don't want to, I want to end on an up note.
I love that optimistic story, yes.
But I mean, then I flashed on fracking, and I just done some research on fracking in the United States. I didn't realize, I thought there was like 50 fracking wells. There's 3.5 million.
Yeah.
And well, there's 1 million dead ones that are still leaking methane. But let's not.
No.
I don't want to end on that.
On a happy note, last year was the first year that the U.S. There was 1 million vehicle sales annually for 2023, and
a million electric vehicle sales.
1 million electric.
Oh wow, sales. That's amazing!
Yeah, that was the first time that we crossed that million mark, and I expect that in 2024 we'll beat that. So we'll just keep moving forward.
So that when we see a headline in our lovely newspaper that's called the Daily Mail that says everyone hates electric vehicles, there's some people in America that don't.
There's some people in America that don't. Yes. Yeah. They're choosing electric.
There's quite a few of them. Yes. Because we've just passed the 1 million total electric vehicles mark, on the road.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the other one, I mean, you have mentioned this, and I will wind it up soon, but there is the delivery vehicles and the trucks. So we've sort of done cars, buses, bikes. But I think that is fascinating. So that's a report I've recently read about Amazon. Amazon are run the biggest electric fleet in the world.
Yes.
Because we have two big Amazon distribution centers in the UK that 100% of their vans are electric.
Yeah.
So, and they charge them at their base and all those things.
Absolutely. So, yeah. So that's been an important point for us to, particularly because of, the freight industry and these fulfillment centers. So we have been pushing Amazon to do better and to really, really invest in electric vehicles. And so we're starting to see that. And it's, I see it on social media where somebody actually spots an electric Amazon truck and it says zero emission. And, it's like, that's the moment where you actually see the advocacy work in action, right?
Yeah.
In a practical way. We've also done a lot of advocacy with the U.S. Postal Service. And so we've been pushing them to electrify because many of their vehicles, they just don't go that many miles per day.
No.
They all have a dedicated parking spot. You could easily charge them, whether it's throughout the day, throughout the week. And so, U.S. Postal Service, through our advocacy, they have made commitments to electrify their entire fleet, and we're just pushing them to continue that. So it's not just rhetoric, but really making sure that that's moving forward, and that we're soon starting to see those electric postal vehicles.
Right, and the one I'd love to see is I think it's called the Beast. It's sort of presidential vehicle, but wouldn't it be cool if because it would be so. What does it weigh? 4 tons. Well, add a ton of batteries, it'll weigh 5. No one will notice. And it would be fine.
Yes. It's one of those things where we talk sometimes about how Carter had the first solar panels on the White House years ago.
Yes.
And so I want Biden to have the first electric
presidential vehicle.
But also his motorcade. We need to get his motorcade to have electric motorcycles and electric vehicles. Let's have that be a positive example. One quick anecdote here. Last year, we worked with New York City to electrify their municipal fleet. So they made a commitment, and they passed a law so that New York City actually has the largest municipal fleet in the country. It's 30,000 vehicles, and it's light duty, medium duty, heavy duty. So they have targets based on the different classes of vehicles, vehicle types. But it's ambitious, and we're really hoping to point to that example and pushing other cities and states to electrify as well.
because I was desperate to go back, literally, sort of for research to see. I haven't been to New York for, I don't know, maybe 8-9 years. And I mean, there was a lot of cycling there always. And I first visited in the mid 1980s, stayed with friends in Manhattan who had a bicycle. They let me ride it. I rode all over New York, but I will say it was the case. And I was a really experienced urban cyclist at the time. I was living in London, cycling in London every day. Some of the taxi drivers then, I just thought they just want to kill me, so I better get out of the way. It was fairly scary. But is there now some cycling infrastructure?
Absolutely.
I've seen sort of images of it in New York.
Yeah. So
there was none back then.
So there's actually several corridors where it's all protected bike lane, and you're actually like away from the street,
from the traffic.
A lot of really great bike paths, and also actually areas that are just not open to cars anymore. And so I love, whenever I visit New York, I love cycling around New York.
Yeah. But I've got to tell you, the other one was stayed in Los Angeles with friends who lived in an area called Echo Park in Los Angeles. But I cycled from there. I thought, I'll go to Venice. I've heard of that. I cycled to Venice. It's quite a long way.
It is. Well, LA is huge.
It's huge. Yeah. And I had no idea. But I was cycling through Beverly Hills and a police car pulled in front of me with its lights going, and two exquisitely they were just so smart and clean and polite, but they stopped and they asked me if I was okay because I was cycling.
Yeah.
So they weren't angry. I hadn't done anything, because I was going, oh my God, have I done something wrong? I'm really sorry. I'm a tourist. They went, no, sir, you're fine. Why are you cycling?
Yeah. I'm sure,
anyway. I bet that's changed as well.
I will say there's like clean transportation advocates and like some of my heroes, like just folks that are just tireless advocates that are really, really leading by example. And so I have several contacts that have e-bikes and are going around LA by bike, and are tweeting about it, because I think I would say it's getting to be more common, and having e-bikes around. I have a friend who has a cargo e-bike and takes his kids around in LA. But it's not as common as in other parts of the country.
It makes sense in New York because it's so such a dense urban area, whereas Los Angeles is spread out. It feels like hundreds of miles.
I will say that in all of these like metropolitan cities, you are seeing a bike share. And so you can actually go, and if you're there for like work or conference or visiting friends, you can just rent an e-bike. You can still get a bike. Or a regular pedal bike or an e-bike. And get around, and especially with the safe infrastructure, it's much more welcoming. So maybe you wouldn't have been stopped by the police in this day and age.
No, they were very charming, and they let me carry on, so it wasn't serious. But it was just a very memorable moment.
Yeah, it's like, what did I do wrong?
But anyway, Katherine, look, we could talk for hours. It's been a joy talking to you, and there's loads of other topics I'm sure we haven't covered, but we've kind of covered the main things. I mean, the other thing I haven't mentioned is the forthcoming election, which I suppose could change things, but I'm kind of hoping it doesn't. I'm allowed to say that as a non-American.
Yeah. As an American, I hope it doesn't change things as well. But we really see Biden as a climate leader, and he has made clean transportation one of his top priorities, and we've gotten a lot done, and so we want to keep going. You want to keep doing it. Absolutely. Well, all power to you, and I really admire what you do. I think it's amazing, and I really appreciate you taking time to talk to us today. It's been a joy. It's been a joy for me too. Thank you so much. Good. Hopefully we can do it again one day. Absolutely. Anyway, thank you so much, Katherine. All right, take care. Really hope you enjoyed that. What an amazing woman. What an absolute joy to talk to her. Occasionally I've done podcasts where you have to kind of think and really struggle a bit. It was just joy talking to Katherine. She's an amazing woman. What an incredible job she's doing. There's so much more we could have talked about. We didn't have time, but I really hope you enjoyed that. And that's all. As always, if you have been, thank you for watching and listening.